At 7:33 on the morning of June 10, 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 was climbing through 17,300 feet over England. Then the cockpit filled with a deafening bang. The left windscreen disappeared. In a fraction of a second, the aircraft's captain was pulled from his seat and halfway through the opening. His head and upper body were now outside the aircraft, exposed to freezing air and a violent slipstream. Only his legs remained inside the cockpit. A cabin crew member rushed forward, wrapped his arms around the captain's waist and refused to let go. But this accident did not truly begin at 17,300 feet. It began about 27 hours earlier, on the ground. Flight 5390 was a scheduled service from Birmingham, England to Malaga, Spain. On board were 81 passengers, 4 cabin crew members and 2 pilots. The aircraft was a BAC One-Eleven, registration GBJRT. It departed Birmingham at 7:20 that morning. The takeoff was normal. The first officer handled the aircraft during departure. Once it was established in the climb, the captain took control. Both pilots released their shoulder harnesses, which was permitted under the airline's normal procedures. The captain also loosened his lap belt. Behind them, the cabin crew prepared to serve a meal and drinks. 13 minutes after takeoff, everything changed. As the aircraft climbed through approximately 17,300 feet, there was a violent explosion. Condensation mist filled the cabin as pressurized air escaped through the cockpit. The captain's left windscreen had separated completely from its frame. The captain was pulled forward and partly outside. The cockpit door was blown inward and landed across the radio and navigation console. Loose papers and debris flew around the flight deck. Movement of the control column disconnected the autopilot and the aircraft pitched down and rolled to the right. The crew member standing near the cockpit rushed through the doorway and caught the captain around his waist. The purser removed the broken door and pushed it into the forward toilet. The remaining cabin crew ordered the passengers to fasten their seatbelts and take emergency positions. Inside the cockpit, the first officer was now alone at the controls. The first officer regained control and began a rapid descent toward a safer altitude, but the wind noise inside the cockpit was so intense that he could barely hear air traffic control. Meanwhile, 2 crew members tried to pull the captain back inside. Through a small side window, they could see his head and torso outside the aircraft, but the force of the slipstream made it impossible to bring him back through the opening. The first crew member's arms began losing strength. He was suffering frostbite and bruising from the windscreen frame. Another crew member replaced him. He strapped himself into a cockpit jump seat and grasped both of the captain's legs. Before he could secure his grip, the captain moved another 6 to 8 inches outside. The crew member held him by the ankles, and he continued holding him throughout the descent and landing. The first officer and the crew members believed the captain's survival was highly improbable. Then, late in the descent, at about 3,000 feet, the captain began kicking his legs. He was still alive. The first officer now faced several problems at once. The aircraft had suffered an explosive decompression. The captain was incapacitated. The cockpit was filled with violent wind, noise, and debris. Communication with air traffic control was extremely difficult. After descending and slowing the aircraft, the first officer requested directions to the nearest suitable airport. Controllers turned Flight 5390 toward Southampton. The first officer confirmed that the runway was long enough, positioned the aircraft for a visual approach, and prepared to land without assistance from the captain. At 7:55, only 22 minutes after the windscreen failed, Flight 5390 landed safely on runway 02 at Southampton Airport. All 81 passengers survived. The cabin crew continued holding the captain until the aircraft had completely stopped. Airport firefighters and ambulance crews recovered the captain from outside the cockpit. He had remained partly outside the aircraft through the entire descent and landing. He suffered fractures to his right arm and wrist, a broken left thumb, bruising, frostbite, and shock. But he survived. One cabin crew member suffered cuts and bruising to his arm. There were no other reported injuries. The official investigation credited the first officer and cabin crew with preventing a catastrophe. But investigators still had to answer one central question: how could a commercial aircraft windscreen simply leave the plane? The answer was found in the 90 bolts securing the windscreen. The windscreen had been replaced during the night shift of June 8th and 9th. Flight 5390 was the aircraft's first flight after that replacement. Investigators found that 84 of the 90 bolts were approximately 26 thousandths of an inch smaller in diameter than specified. The remaining 6 were the correct diameter, but 1/10 of an inch too short. Because the windscreen was installed from the outside, pressure inside the aircraft pushed outward against it. As Flight 5390 climbed, the pressure difference increased. Eventually, the incorrectly fitted bolts could no longer retain the windscreen. The first full pressure test of the installation happened in flight, with 87 people aboard. The investigation found that the windscreen replacement involved a chain of poor decisions and missed warnings. The shift maintenance manager had not changed this type of windscreen for approximately 2 years. He briefly reviewed the maintenance manual but did not use the illustrated parts catalog to confirm the required bolt number. He also did not use the available store system to locate the correct parts. Instead, he took one of the removed bolts to the stores and searched for a visual match. The previous windscreen had itself been installed with bolts that were shorter than specified. By matching the replacements to those incorrect old bolts, the maintenance manager began with the wrong reference. A store supervisor told him which bolts were actually required, but the warning did not change his decision. In another storage area, under poor lighting, he compared bolts by sight and touch. The bolts he selected appeared almost identical. They were not. During installation, additional warning signs were missed. The smaller bolt heads did not properly fill the countersunk holes around the windscreen. The equipment made it difficult to see and feel that the threads were slipping. Access to parts of the windscreen was awkward, forcing the maintenance manager to stretch across the aircraft's nose while working, yet the installation was completed and certified. The investigation concluded that this was not simply the error of one individual. The windscreen replacement was a safety-critical task, but it had not been identified as a vital point. That meant no independent inspection was required. The same person could select the bolts, install the windscreen, judge the quality of the work, and certify the aircraft for service. Local management, quality monitoring, and audits had also failed to identify the inadequate work practices. The wrong bolts were the physical reason the windscreen separated, but the deeper failure was a safety system that allowed one person's decisions to pass without an effective second check. Following the investigation, 8 safety recommendations were issued. Flight 5390 is remembered because a captain survived outside an aircraft at 17,300 feet. But survival was only half the story. The passengers lived because a first officer controlled an almost impossible emergency and because cabin crew members refused to release their grip. The accident happened because 90 small pieces of metal were never independently checked. At 17,300 feet, the cockpit window failed, but the system that allowed it to fail had broken long before takeoff.